So I think everybody really knows who Wanderback is, but just to recap for anyone who doesn't know so much about us, we are a single malt distillery based in Hood River. We're a little bit different from other distilleries, and our mission is to really explore the endless possibilities of American whiskey, especially single malts. And so with that, it means that we don't have a flagship release. We actually do a special edition every year of a new whiskey. We work with partner distilleries. We collaborate with them. Phil, who is our founder, he's my husband, and the maker. He creates the grain bill and then works with the partner distillery to create the new make spirit, which we then bring back to the farm in Hood River, where we age it, finish it, and bottle it. So we're not about doing the same thing again and again. We're really all about exploration and seeing what we can really enjoy and do with our whiskey. So I think that's everything from me. I don't think I missed anything. I'm going to hand it over to Phil. And like I say, please do chat to everybody, ask your questions, and I'm going to be kind of feeding that into Phil as he goes through what we hope will be educational and informative, but also sharing and learning from each other.
Great, Sash. Thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, this is a bit, this is good, but odd, strange a little bit. I see some faces that I haven't seen for a long time and some new faces. Thanks for taking the time to join us, all of you. Yeah, this COVID virus thing has definitely had some negatives to it, but this is, I think, a bit of a positive. We've been trying to figure out ways of connecting with everyone, and this is our first virtual discussion like this, which hopefully will lead to more. And we chose this subject because it's pretty core to our company and our distillery. We have a lot of respect for what the barrel does to whiskey, and we're going to talk today about some of the science. I'll try not to bore you. It's Sunday afternoon, so I'll try and keep it as well, somewhat informative, but light as well. And I really would ask you to ask any questions. There are no bad questions. And so I think it's pretty straightforward how you ask questions, and I'll stop and answer or take a pause. So let's move on, Sash, to the next slide, please. So this is a very heavy science slide. There may be a few of these, but so we age all of our whiskey in oak casks. We use both new and previously used oak casks. We're generally using a full-size cask, and there are various components in the wood, in the oak, that give us taste. Hemicellulose, lignin, tannins, lactones, these are all cell wall components, intercellular. Some of them are inherent in the wood, and then others are brought out and changed with the heating of the wood. And then some others are changed as well with the spirit sitting in the barrel. So some things change as it's exposed to the alcohol, and then the oxygen over time. So these are just some of the major components that we think about with all wood, but particularly oak, white oak. Next slide, Sash.
Do you want to go in a little bit more into each of them, Phil, and the kinds of flavors that they impart into the whiskey?
Well, some of them, so the easier ones, the easier group is the tannins. Tannins are present in many plants and trees. Tannins are a very astringent tasting molecule, and they are, a lot of the tannins we see in the natural environment are actually protective. They protect the plants against being eaten because they are so bitter. The hemicellulose, cellulose, these are sugar compounds, generally long chain carbons, that are present in wood. They form the the cellular matrix of wood. These are generally, as you would imagine, being sugars, they are sweeter compounds that are present, give a very pleasant taste to spirit. Um, Lactones, these are more of the coconut and clove type tastes. Lactones are present in wood. They are changed as well significantly by the heating of the wood, particularly not so much charring. Charring is, we'll get into this in a minute, but charring and um, toasting are two terms that we use for. Charring is a much higher heat type treatment, whereas toasting is a more prolonged lower heat treatment. You don't get necessarily much flavor from charring. It really carbonizes most molecules, but it's important for well, I'll get into this in a second. But anyways, lactones are changed significantly by the heating of wood. And again, some very pleasant tastes that can be imparted to the spirit. We'll talk about extraction and these sorts of things now in a minute, but these are some of the compounds found in the wood. So how do barrels impart flavor? I think now, next slide, Sash. I think now what we'll talk about, so basically when we think about how a wood barrel changes the taste of spirit, we have three main buckets that we think about. One of them is extraction that we'll talk about now, but then there are there are three main buckets that we talk about: oxidation, and there's also some additive effects of sitting in a barrel. But extraction is basically where the spirit enters to a varying degree, to a varying depth of the wood, and pulls molecules out of the wood. And depending on the wood treatment, so I mentioned charring and toasting earlier on. Charring is, and toasting as well, is a way of heat. We heat the wood, it changes and breaks down the wood structure, and it allows the new make spirit to penetrate deeper into the wood, and from those depths, certain molecules are extracted, and these extractions fluctuate over time. So generally, when the wood is warmer during the day or during the summer months, the pores of the wood open, and the spirit will penetrate deeply into the wood. And then when things cool and contract, the spirit moves out of the wood and pulls some of these molecules out. So it's a very cyclical thing. It really is helped along by the cycles, the day and night cycles, and the seasons as well. But extraction is a big area, a big mode of imparting flavor to the new make spirit from the wood. Let's see the next slide, Sash.
There's a question for you, Phil. Can previously used casks be penetrated deeper?
They can. Many of the extracted molecules are not available to the spirit. So when you take a cask that has previously had bourbon or sherry or other thing, wine even, wine not so much. Any spirit or any liquid that has sat in a barrel that's of a reasonably high alcohol content will have extracted most of the things like lactones when this first spirit sat in the new wood. So then when you use it again, many of the molecules that were available to the first time it was filled are not available. There are some methods of regenerating casks that are used. So some companies or some distilleries will take a cask and basically, with various methods, by hand, by kind of a Dremel type tool, take the inner layer off and then re-char or re-toast the newly exposed wood. And there are some new molecules that can be extracted, because you're basically going deeper into the depths of the wood. Generally, we think that spirit, you can cut a stave and see how far the spirit has penetrated to the wood. 5-6 millimeters is kind of a rule of thumb that I think of, but it really depends on the length of time the spirit has sat in the barrel, the percentage alcohol of the spirit that was in it. Whiskey or a higher 60-70% ABV will penetrate deeper than sherry or wine, definitely. So there are less molecules available in a secondary use barrel, but there are other magical things that are available that we're going to talk about in a minute: oxidation, and so on. So that's basically the way we think about it. But we have a lot of respect, and we use a lot of previously used barrels for different things. I think I'll get into that later in the talk, but depending on what the cask was used for. So oxidation is the next big bucket of ways that barrels impart flavor. Oxidation is basically, with oxygen, certain biochemical processes occur. These generally occur more rapidly in warmer temperatures. And these barrels are an amazing vessel for holding whiskey because they are watertight, but they do allow air to pass through. So oxygen passes in and out of the barrel, and it really does play a big role in changing flavors. Generally, I think of it as making the edges less sharp on a whiskey. It really has a positive effect. And where we really isolate that oxidation way of imparting flavor is by using casks that have been used multiple times, let's say multiple times for bourbons and ryes, and most of the flavors have been extracted from the wood, but they're an amazing vessel for oxidation. And it's a really nice way of rounding the edges of a whiskey and making it more mellow. So again, oxidation, big area that we utilize for changing our whiskey flavor, almost always for the better. So yeah, these are some of the things that happen. But I think of oxidation mainly as a mellowing rather than an adding of flavors. I think there are flavors that are changed, no doubt. With the cleaving of certain molecules to smaller molecules, and oftentimes, most frequently, to better tasting molecules.
Phil, we use a lot of specialty malts in our whiskey. Does oxidation play a more important or a different role when you have that mix of specialty malts with the pale malt?
No, so oxidation, so it's how should I answer that? When we make our whiskey, what we're trying to do basically is layer flavors. And these specialty malts that we use are a bit of a unique thing, generally for scotches and ryes, and most American bourbons and ryes. Specialty malts wouldn't be used. They're more expensive. They're basically, you're taking a barley grain and you're not just malting it, which is great and makes some amazing flavors. You're generally heating it more to varying degrees, and you're creating more and more flavors through various processes, Maillard reactions, and so on. This specialty malt portion of our, let's say, flavor layers is something we really like. It's something we feel quite proud about. And what we're trying to do with the barrel aging is trying not to mask those flavors. We're trying to complement and not, one of the big things that we really try. So we use New American Oak we use New American Oak from almost all of our new make spirit. We are doing some work now with putting new make spirit in previously used casks. But most of our whiskey begins its aging in New American Oak. And one of the things we have to be very careful of, particularly in the summertime, is we don't want to overshadow the tastes of these, for example, the specialty malt flavors with the barrel flavors, mainly the extracted flavors from this new wood. So um, I wouldn't say that oxidation plays a role with the specialty malts. Yeah, it's again a layering. It's a layering effect, and so not so much to do with the specialty malts. And then subtraction is the third bucket. Subtraction, basically, subtraction of flavors, bad flavor. Well, I shouldn't say bad flavor. Less desirable flavors, maybe, is what I should call them. There are some sulfur compounds and other flavors that are in fainty flavors that are in new make spirit that are not so pleasant. And especially during the first year or so, and again, this depends on climate and alcohol percentage in the barrel, but there are many undesirable compounds that are removed from the spirit. Well, removed and changed. Some things, sulfur compounds, they bind with molecules on the wood and are extracted or subtracted. Other molecules are cleaved, or the longer chains are cleaved or shortened, creating different, more pleasant molecules. And so subtraction, like the other two, those are the three main buckets that we think about when we think about the effect barrels have on whiskey taste. And magic and mystery, I mean, there's magic and mystery is a funny one. I think, well, first of all, I think that barrels are an amazingly magical vessel that we stumbled upon probably 150, 200 years ago. And I didn't go into much of this. I mean, the history of how this happened, probably most of you are aware of it. But I mean, wood vessels have been used to hold liquids for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it was probably by accident that we put whiskey in wood barrels, some of which probably had been used for other things like storing fish, which may or may not have had a good effect on the taste. But we sort of stumbled on this amazing effect that wood barrels have on whiskey. Most of the whiskey in the 18th and 19th century was not aged in wood. It was probably taken right off the still. Which some of it I would imagine was fairly dangerous. But we've now stumbled on, or we now use wood casks to age almost, well, for all whiskey. That's one of the main characteristics, and it has an amazing effect. We'd like to think that we can predict what those effects are, and to some broad strokes, I think we can. But there are also some things that happen that are not predictable, and that's one of the things that I really enjoy, is seeing some of the less predictable things happen.
Phil,
So,
we have a question from Dave just before we move on to kind of our approach. Oops, sorry. And he asked, would we ever use any other kind of wood? Would we ever consider French oak, for example?
yeah. Definitely, and actually, some of the port casks that we've used for batch 3 were French oak, and so definitely, French oak, French white oak. So I didn't go into the type of wood that we use. White oak generally. There's a reason for that. White oak is the special oak. First of all, it grows in the United States, which is where we are, and that's quite nice. And the other thing is, structurally, it works quite well. It has a structural framework that, if cut properly, works very well to make a water-soluble vessel. And generally, the white oak that we use, Quercus alba, here in the United States, is generally, it's in Kentucky and Missouri that we find these oaks. But we're also finding species of white oak, here in Oregon, in other parts of the U.S. That have taste characteristics that are super interesting, and we look at it. And then the French oak as well. I mean, French oak has been used for hundreds of years more, and does have characteristics that are interesting for us. The tough thing for us is we have so many choices. We live in a country that grows a lot of trees, thankfully. And we also have availability of casks coming from Europe and elsewhere. You know, one of the challenges for us is just strategizing which ones to use. White oak from Kentucky and Missouri makes amazing tasting whiskey. But there are other choices as well, and we may talk a little bit about how we use finishing casks for our whiskey. But again, it gets back to the layering of flavors. You know, where are we at 2+ years of maturation, and you know, where do we want to go? What things can we get from a French oak cask, for example? um, European cask from northern Spain. And yeah, I mean, the options are endless, and it's that's quite fun to think about that and try to layer these tastes in a nice way so that you know, people like it. Next slide, Sash. Oh yeah, temperature and climate. So this is a picture of our two barns. The barn on the right no longer exists. Right now, we are in the middle of constructing a similarly shaped barn, but this one was the barn on the left is our distillery, and we were able to replace. You can see the foundation. That's new. It was crumbling and falling down, and we were lucky enough to be able to reconstruct that, and that's the home of our distillery. But then this barn on the right, it was never built with a foundation, and a stream basically ran underneath it, so we couldn't save it. And so we are in the middle of replacing that barn, which is super exciting. But getting back to the talk, temperature and climate, we were lucky. Well, I mean, having we've owned this farm for I think 15 years now, and it seemed pretty clear that it would be a nice place and a good place to age whiskey. And it turns out it is. It's not too hot, but hot enough. It's not too humid, and it's got cold times and warm, even hot times. Good fluctuations of temperature, which is important. And so with those high temperatures, reactions move quickly and happen. And then at the low temperatures, we rely more on the oxidation type reactions. The swings in temperature move things around through the wood, out in and out of the wood. So it turns out it's a really nice place to age whiskey. And you know, even within the barn, there are differences in temperature and climate. The top levels of the barn are much hotter, as you can imagine, and the lower floor there is pretty much a cellar, or half of that lower barn level is underground, and so it really it mutes those temperature swings, and so things move a little slower there. And so it's been fun for us to experiment and see the differences even within the barn itself. So the drying time and the technique of drying barrels, or the wood to be used to make a barrel, is very important for us. We use wood that is air dried. We try to get wood that's air dried for at least 3 years. Some of what we've used is aged for just over 2 years. Air drying wood is better because, well, for a number of reasons. The natural movement of water out of the wood um, creates new compounds. Molds sit on the wood while it's sitting outside and break down certain molecules and make them available to the spirit once it's in the wood. And then, so we don't use kiln dried wood. It's more expensive, but it's worth it for us. And we also, in terms of the treating of the wood, so the heating of the wood, I think we're going to talk about that in the next slide. That's a big thing for us as well. Unlike most of the bourbon and rye makers in this country, we we don't heavily char our wood prior to, or once it's made into a cask. We toast our wood heavily, and by doing that, we create quite a depth of new molecules that are available to the whiskey. Charred wood is charred. It's carbonized. It's generally not. There are not a lot of molecules to extract from that charred layer to impart flavor. It does act as a filter, and it does impart some flavor, but the real flavors are created when you toast these barrels. So we heavily toast our barrels. But even between barrel makers, cooperages, there's differences. You know, we've used two cooperages, and we've asked for the same type of treatment, a light char and a heavy toast, and that can differ from cooperage to cooperage, and even from barrel to barrel. I mean, wood is obviously, it's different from tree to tree, and even sections on the tree. So there's variability in all these things, but we generally toast the inner layers of our wood. So ABV, I'll talk about this briefly. And so we generally barrel at 60%. We have barreled at slightly higher, 63%. We chose this because, so generally, whiskey in the world is barreled at anywhere from probably high 50s ABV to 70, possibly low 70s. And basically, you know, the higher the alcohol content, the more, what we call it, hydrophilic molecules are solubilized. So the how should I say it? The less water soluble molecules are dissolved when you're at a higher percentage alcohol, and the opposite for the lower. So we're on the lower of the range of strength of spirit, and we do that because we're in a somewhat of a middle ground, but on the lower end of the middle ground, we're trying to look for these water soluble molecules that tend to be sweeter, more pleasant. But I mean, that I'm sure that's an opinion that varies from person to person. You can see here on the back right, if you can see that picture, that is one of our rum casks for batch 2. And you can imagine, you can look at the defects of that. It's a very dark cask. It held a very dark rum, and the defects of that wood. Some of these casks were very difficult to make them watertight, but they've imparted quite a nice flavor. So we're hoping to continue doing that. Batch 2 of our releases was aged in, finished in that type of cask.
Phil, I have a question just going back to charring, and whether when the question is charring used more for color than for flavor, I suppose?
No, I wouldn't say, geez, my sideburns are getting itchy. I really need a haircut. I wouldn't say that charring increases the flavor. Toasting, I would say that actually probably is the opposite, although there's probably a difference of opinion there. Toasting gives you a very dark brown, whereas charring, you know, charred wood, as you would imagine, is it's black. There's not much color there. So I would say it's probably the opposite. But you know, deep to those charred layers, the inner layers of charring, there are toasted layers. I mean, it's not. There's a gradient, and so yeah, a charred cask will also impart color to the spirit, but I think that comes mainly from the deeper layers of the wood rather than the charred layer. Most of the color happens the first 6-12 months. We don't use any coloring for our spirit. And so you take samples from the casks, and at 6-12 months, you've already got a fairly deep amber color. You may also, some of you, if you've had a look, notice some of the more ochre reddish colors in the batch 3, and I think that's from those port casks rather than the new oak cask or the charring or toasting of those casks.
Great, thanks, Phil. And then our kind of last factor and what we do at Wanderback.
Wood and barrel size. So, you know, this is a bit of a controversial topic. I mean, my opinion here is that you can make good whiskey from small barrels. That's sort of not what the traditionalists would say. But I've tasted some amazing whiskey with using small casks. Balcones, I know, did that early on, and they made some amazing whiskey. It just takes a skill to use a small cask. When you use a small cask, less than 53 gallons, more of the whiskey is touching wood as a percentage. And so you're imparting flavors faster, and especially in a warm climate, you've got to be very careful. Things move fast. First of all, that small cask has to be made with good quality wood and has to be heated properly. And then you have to watch it very closely, especially if you're in a warm climate, because things move fast. And then you have to use your other casks, particularly your neutral casks, to mellow some of these flavors out. So we talked about wood a fair bit, and the quality of wood, and the heat treatment of that wood. Barrel size, I mean, we use a standard barrel because that's a good middle ground for us. Things move not too fast or too slow. They're readily available. We can find really good quality casks made with good quality wood and heat treated properly. Um, we may look at using some of the larger casks to sit our whiskey that we want to age for longer than the 4 years that we're currently targeting for release. Maybe slightly under 3 years for some. But currently we use a standard 53-gallon cask.
Wonderful. We have a question, Phil, from Rob, who is saying he's a newbie to the science of whiskey, and asking about the different barrels are used throughout the process. And so maybe you could just kind of run him through a kind of aging and finishing barrel kind of philosophy.
Yeah, so I mean, every distillery has I would imagine there are sort of classifications of aging sort of strategy. Um, we have a strategy at Wanderback where we we utilize new casks initially. We love the flavor of new casks. It imparts, especially with extraction, some amazing flavors. So generally, we start the aging in a standard new American white oak cask. We watch very closely. I've mentioned a few times this whole layering concept, and I think of I cook. I think about that when I'm cooking, and I also think about that, um, Cody and I think about that when we're thinking about the flavors. We're layering flavors. And so we have to be careful that we don't sit our whiskey in those new casks for too long, especially if they're in a warmer climate, the upper levels of the barn. Generally, once we feel we've got a nice layer from the new oak, we'll generally place that whiskey in a more neutral cask, so a cask that's been used previously for bourbon or rye, or Canadian whiskey actually, and will not have so much flavors to extract from the wood, but really some nice oxidation processes going on, and subtraction probably to a degree as well, especially if it's a charred cask, because like I said, we don't use charred casks, so there's some filtration that we think we can benefit from. And then at the end, depending on the whiskey that we're doing, our batch one was not finished in a special. It's a very for those of you who've tasted it, it's a big whiskey. It's got the big taste of the new oak casks and the malt and the flavors from the fermentation and distillation. But it's new oak primarily. We have have it in a neutral cask for a really short time, and then like for batch 2 and 3, we chose a finishing cask. I like rum. I've tasted some nice scotches that were finished in rum casks, and so that's, well, some of the reasons why we chose rum casks to finish batch 2. And then for batch 3, we chose port. Port is it's obviously some very nice flavors, and that's a finishing cask we had to be more careful with. That's a lower ABV spirit. Port is a lower strength spirit that's sat in that cask, and so there's flavors there that are imparted fairly quickly when you put our whiskey in the port cask. We have to watch it very closely, not to overdo it. It doesn't take very long, 2 months, 3 months. And so, yeah, that's generally our philosophy. We start with new oak. We generally have a variable time in a neutral cask, and then we finish it if that's what we're going for the last step.
Brilliant, Phil. Thank you. I just wanted to throw in a comment from Anna, who says new oak can be so overwhelming. I like that you're mindful of that. So
Yeah, we agree. I mean, I love. I mean, there's some amazing bourbons and ryes from this country that I love, and but new oak has a ton of flavor, and we love it. It's amazing. Um, but we're trying, we're trying to create a balance here. There are, Sash mentioned with one of the questions that was asked, the specialty malts. Those the flavors from those specialty malts would be a shame to overshadow with the astringency of a prolonged period in a new oak cask. So, um, yeah, we have a healthy respect. We feel really grateful that we have new oak casks available to us fairly easily in the U.S. But we have to be careful not to overdo it. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's a big thing for us for sure. And then too with the finishing casks, I mentioned the port. There are many whiskeys on the market that are finished in port that are really nice, but then there are some that overdo it, and it's a shame when you. Well, I mean, that taste is a very subjective thing, and there may be people that really enjoy that. But for us, we're trying to create a balance with all these things, and so you can also overdo it with those finishing casks as well, particularly the port, and we haven't used many of the previously used wine casks, but we will. And we're going to have to be careful as well with those, the Sauterne and these sorts of things, because they will impart flavor fairly quickly.
Phil, we've got a question from Charles, aka Drinking Caveman, which I think is a brilliant.
Hello there, stranger.
So you will know, pretty much everyone on this call, that we have our kind of different collections, and a collection is a run of whiskey that we do with a particular distillation partner. And batches 1, 2, 3, and 4 were all distillation runs that we collaborated with Westland in Seattle for. Our next collection we're calling the Lone Star Collection. And Charles is asking if we're looking at any different or casks with this collection, and what our thoughts are on that.
Well, we are absolutely. As I was mentioning, it's challenging with the choices we have available because there are so many great choices. But I wouldn't commit to anything now. Certainly, we've got some batches here, finishing strategies that we feel work fairly well. But I think it's going to depend on how this whiskey comes along. There are some casks now. It's been sitting for I think 2+ years. There are some casks now that are really nosing nicely. And so we have some ideas. We've thought and talked about it. But honestly, I think what's going to happen is as these tastes start to reveal themselves, I'm hoping it will become obvious to us what we need to do with it. I think what we will do is we'll generally have a strategy of releasing a first batch that is a big whiskey that is probably not finished, and then subsequent releases that will be finished. But the choices, we're excited about sherry. We're excited about some of the wine. I do like rum. There's different ways we can do the rum, port again. So I won't commit because I don't think we should. We have to wait and see how this goes along. I mean, one of the most amazing things about well, what we're doing here is sort of the coaxing along of these whiskeys. It's not like we have a recipe and we're following and checking the boxes. What we're trying to do is just not get in the way of this whiskey as it ages and develops, and add our little things as we go, but follow some general principles that we need to follow, but try to let the whiskey go where it wants to go. So we're trying not to be too strong with anything, and I think we'll make those. It's a very good question. I think we'll make those decisions as time goes on, and yeah, and we welcome your input. We hope to see a lot of you, hopefully all of you, at the distillery when we do our events, and it's fun to get the input from you, the customer, because that's ultimately who we're trying to please, and it's nice to get the input, particularly from people like you who know whiskey and appreciate and have sort of tested the spectrum or the gamut of what can be done. And that's quite a fun part of it as well. So yeah, I won't commit, but I'm excited. This Lone Star, whatever we're going to call it, group or batch or release, whatever, is going to be amazing. It's the same recipe, but a different fermentation, distillation, but everything else is the same. And already it'll blow your mind the differences. So anyways, I'll leave it at that.
Bill, we have a great question from Doug, and it comes up all the time, and it's around the definition of single malt. But specifically, he's asking if you were to use different barrels and casks and blend the different taste, would it still be considered a single malt?
Yeah, not if it was from a different distillery. That's the main thing. And you know, it's not a tough thing. It's a thing for us. You know, I mean, we're following a different model here, obviously, of a distillery where we're going out, we're collaborating with these other distilleries, we're learning from them and hopefully them from us. And we're making our spirit this recipe we like, and then taking it back to our farm and doing our thing. And you know, I would love, well, I my wife and I, who's moderating this, sometimes different our opinion. So I would love to blend whiskeys from different distilleries together. I think we're going to have, as we move on with this, some amazing complementary tastes that are different. But we're hitching our wagon, and well, so we will only make malt whiskey. We like the idea of single malt whiskey because it then, you know, it compartmentalizes it. It's sort of, we bring you on a journey just like we're going on one, and we expose you to the differences that are imparted from the different distilleries versus, you know, the other things that we do. But to, you know, from the federal government and our regulatory people, there is a definition, and we follow it. And to be called a single malt whiskey, it needs to come from the same distillery.
Great, thanks, Bill. There's been a lot of questions, which we always get, about well, I'm going to just first read Blake's comment. The new oak flavor and color is very prominent in your single malt whiskey. It's magnificent. Thank you, Blake. I would love to see cask strength versions of these. Any plans for that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely. We're cask strength is special for many reasons. Yeah, for sure. We
do have a couple of really great barrels set aside. Which
we have some numbers, and yeah. So definitely cask strength, love it as well. It's the full kabang, everything that's coming out of the barrel without. But you know, the other thing, yeah. So in answer to your question, definitely there will be cask strength releases, special releases, but water. We didn't talk about water. I think we're going to talk about water. Maybe this will be a segue into the next topic that we'll cover. But water is an important part of our flavor, what we put in our bottles as well, you know, and we dilute from when we take it out of the barrel. We dilute to different degrees depending on the various batches that we've released, and the water that we have in Hood River is really, really good. And so yeah, absolutely, we don't want to, we're going to release some barrel strengths, but I also think that one of the things that makes our whiskey taste good is the Hood River water that comes off of Mount Hood, that we just, it's good. It's really quite tasty. But yeah, we will do barrel strength. That'll be really nice, and they'll be special things, super limited quantities for sure. But we're going to do that.
Phil, I think we have a final, maybe a two-part question from Gregor to maybe wrap up with before, as we're kind of getting towards 10:02. His question is, the concept of Wanderback is all sorts of awesome, partnering with a vision and bringing it back to Oregon, but without a recurring core range or product. is there a common profile or constant aim that is the red thread from a flavor profile that forms Wanderback's North Star?
Yeah. Well, that's a nice question. Very well written as well. Well done. So yeah, as you pointed out, I mean, we don't have a flagship. And again, this is things we talk about and strategize, but currently we don't intend to have a flagship or a bottle that will carry through. We like the idea of limited release. It's kind of nice to look forward to something new, and then when it's finished, it's finished. There is a common thread, though. I mean, we malt whiskey is a particular type of whiskey. I really like this kind of whiskey. I've always liked Scotch and Irish and I when I tasted Stranahan's, I really was blown away back. I don't know, it was maybe 10 years ago, and I'm trying to. I want to stick with that. I think that we have so many. We have so many different uh, buckets of flavor to bring into what we bottle. And first of all, malted barley is a very special grain. It's not, corn. It can be special, and no doubt. Rye to a degree, yes. But malted barley is really special, especially when you add some of these specialty malts, and then we have the wood, and we have the new and the previously used wood as these layering flavors. And so, as a common thread, we will always do malt whiskey, but it's going to be different. And um, I think I'm hoping 10 years from now, people will be able to recognize Wanderback whiskey, a particular type of taste that's different than bourbon and rye, and the other malt whiskeys as well, I hope. But the common thread will be that malted whiskey taste, which is so deep. And it's just for many reasons, but I mean, top reasons. We're in the Northwest. I mean, we have barley that grows. We grow barley on the farm. We have amazing beer here made with this malted barley, and I think it's special for us to. We don't talk much about place apart from, I guess, the farm, but place plays a role in all of this, and where we are, where we live, and where the distillery is. It just makes sense for us to be making malt whiskey. So a bit long-winded, but that was a very good question. I think very good for sure. Yeah.
Fantastic. There are, yes, Charles again is prompting, chocolate malt is the signature. I think that is something very special
It is
in our grain bill.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's some really special whiskeys made with chocolate, but not that many. And it's a grain that chocolate malt. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, is a specialty malt. It's on the spectrum of the amount of heat energy that's added to malt. It's up at the right side. It's a very dark black type malt. It's used to make stouts and some of the more darker ales. Um, it's it's got a ton of tastes, very unique tastes, and yeah, I like stouts. I've always liked stouts, and then it adds some special flavors, depths of flavors to our whiskey. And so yeah, maybe you could say that's that common thread, maybe. But I also don't want us to exclude. There are some tastes that come out of those other specialty malts that we use that are also really nice. And then even the pale malts, I mean, depending on the pale malts that we're using are tasty. But yeah, that's a good one. I like that. I would agree. I think the chocolate malt is pretty unique and special, and I'm pretty happy. I wasn't quite sure if that's what we should use. I didn't want to alienate us. I didn't want us to make whiskey that only a small percentage of people liked, because that taste is not for everyone. But it's interesting to see, especially as you see the progression of the taste from batch 1 to 3 of these whiskeys that we currently have on the shelves. It's interesting to see the tastes that I think are coming from that chocolate malt, how they evolve over time. And so, yeah, but that's a good one. I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay, so then this is going to be the last one. Gregor is pushing me to ask you, Phil, and I think it's a tough question, but if
What?
you, he's asking for your desert island dram. So if you could make a core product and make it any way, any mix, any blend, what would that mix or blend be made out of? What would you do for your desert island dram?
Well, I mean, I'm not just saying this, but some of our whiskeys that had, well, some of the ones that I'm thinking about that we're strategizing Cody and so on with the cask strength. But if you taste some of those whiskeys that we have aging that started out in new casks and then were put in a more neutral cask, and you know, I lump all neutral casks together, but they can be very different, you know, depending on the bourbon that was in them or the rye or even some of the Canadian whiskey neutral casks that we have. And you sit those for a few years in that bottom cellar where things happen more slowly, similar to what they probably would in most distilleries in Scotland and probably Ireland as well. And you really start to get some special things. And I think if I were to be on my desert island and have my whiskey to warm me by the fire, it would be one of ours. Start in a new cask, a really nice new cask, but then put in a neutral cask for a while, a variable while, probably a cask strength, because you know volume matters if you're stranded on a desert island. That would be it.